She slapped me in front of everyone like I was some servant, and my wife told me to apologize to her. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just humiliated, I was erased from my own family. If you've ever been humiliated in public, you know that sting. Now imagine it's your own wife's family. Her mother screamed, "You disgusting man, clean my dress and get out," while everyone sat frozen. And my wife? Instead of defending me, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Apologize to her and leave." That was the knife that cut it. Deeper than the slap. If you think this is bad, just wait. The real twist was waiting at home, and it's something none of them could have predicted. Before I tell you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share this story. It helps more people hear these unbelievable tales. I walked out of that dinner like a shadow. No one followed me. No one cared. Driving home, my chest burned not from anger alone, but from the weight of years of disrespect. I had built this family's life. I had worked day and night, and this was my reward? To be treated like dirt in front of strangers. But here's the thing they didn't know. I wasn't heading home empty-handed. For months, I had been quietly preparing for this exact moment. Every paper, every document, every proof, they were all in my study, locked away, waiting for the day I'd need them. Tonight, the mask had fallen, and tomorrow their world would start to crumble. When they returned home after their laughter-filled dinner, thinking I had just sulked away in shame, they didn't expect what was waiting. The look on their faces when they saw what I had set in motion, priceless. And trust me, the first domino had only just fallen. When they walked through the door later that night, still joking about the dinner, the first thing they noticed was the silence. No TV, no lights in the living room, just the faint glow coming from my study. My wife called out, "Are you still mad?" But I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped out holding a brown envelope, my hand steady though my heart raced. Her mother rolled her eyes and muttered, "Oh, please, still sulking?" That was her last smirk before I tossed the envelope on the table. Inside were copies of every bank transaction, every investment, every property deed that I had managed over the years. They gasped as they flipped through it, realizing that almost everything they owned, the mansion, the cars, even the very restaurant they had just laughed in, was under my name. I said calmly, "You told me to get out? Fine, but let's see how long you stay comfortable without me." My wife's face drained of color, while her sister whispered, "This can't be true." But the real twist came when I pulled out one more document, a partnership agreement with their biggest competitor. My wife's father, who had been too stunned to speak, finally stammered, "What have you done?" I leaned closer and said, "Prepared for this day. You all laughed tonight. Tomorrow the city will laugh at you." The shock in their eyes was almost satisfying. But I wasn't done, because the next morning, something happened at their company that no one, especially my wife, could have ever imagined. The next morning, chaos erupted at their company headquarters. Employees rushed in, whispering and staring at the massive screen in the lobby where the news was playing live. The headline read, "CEO's Family Empire Shaken Secret Deal Exposed." Cameras flashed outside the building, journalists shouting questions, and shareholders storming in with fury. My wife's mother, who had slapped me the night before, walked in proudly dressed as if nothing had happened, only to freeze when she saw the chaos. Her face turned pale when the receptionist handed her a letter marked Official Transfer of Ownership. Overnight, my partnership deal with their competitor had triggered a full takeover. Every project, every asset, every contract now carried my signature. The empire her husband had spent decades building was legally in my control. My wife's sister tried to argue with security, but they told her, "Ma'am, you're no longer on the board. Please step aside." As the boardroom doors swung open, I entered calmly, in a suit they never thought I'd wear. Reporters turned their cameras toward me, snapping photos as I took the head chair. Gasps filled the room when I introduced myself. I am the acting chairman effective immediately, and this morning we'll be reviewing all corrupt management practices, starting with family interference. My wife and her mother stood frozen, watching everything slip away in a single moment. The same people who laughed at me as the low-educated fake dad were now forced to clap as I officially took control. And as I looked at their shocked faces through the glass, I smiled to myself. This was only the beginning of their downfall. The silence in that boardroom didn't last long. One of the senior directors cleared his throat and slid a thick folder across the table toward me. "Sir, these are the reports you requested," he said firmly, ignoring the furious glares from Ezram. My wife's family. Inside were documents detailing years of embezzlement, tax evasion, and money siphoned into private accounts under my mother-in-law's name. My hands shook not from fear, but from excitement. This was bigger than I expected. I looked directly at her. "Do you want me to read these numbers aloud, or should I let the press outside handle it?" She turned white as chalk, her hands trembling on the table. My wife tried to step in, but one of the board members stopped her. "You're not part of this meeting anymore. Please wait outside." Her jaw dropped as she was escorted out like a stranger dot. Then came the real blow. I pulled out a USB drive and plugged it into the projector. The screen lit up with a video of her mother screaming at workers, belittling them, and even forging signatures. The room gasped. Some employees crossed, their arms nodding. They'd seen it but never dared to speak. Now there was proof. When the video ended, I leaned back and said, "You slapped me for bumping into you. But today, the whole world will slap you back for what you've done to this company." A wave of murmurs spread across the room. Reporters were already typing frantically outside. Just then, my phone buzzed a message from the news anchor I had tipped off. "Live broadcast at noon. Ready when you are." I smiled and stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "shall we take this meeting public?" By noon, the press room was jam-packed. Cameras flashed, microphones lined up, and every eye in the city seemed glued to the broadcast. When I walked in, reporters expected me to crumble, a low-educated fake dad being dragged through the mud. But instead, I carried myself with calm authority. The company's board sat behind me, their faces tense, waiting for the storm to break. I began slowly, my voice steady. "Last night, I was insulted by my wife's family in front of my son, the very man I raised single-handedly. They called me fake. They laughed at my education. But today, I am here not for revenge. I'm here for truth." The crowd leaned in. The energy shifted instantly. I clicked a projector remote, and the documents appeared. Bank transfers, shell companies, hidden properties, all tied directly to my mother-in-law and her inner circle. Gasps filled the room. A reporter shouted, "Are you saying the respected Barton family has been laundering money?" I nodded. Not saying, proving. Next, I played the video clips. The footage of her slapping employees, screaming at accountants, and signing off false statements played across national television. Within seconds, social media exploded. Comments poured in. Monster exposed. Justice finally served. That man they mocked is the real hero. Back at home, my wife and her mother sat frozen in front of their TV, their faces drained of color. My son watched beside them, stunned, then slowly turned toward his mother with a look she'd never forget: disgust. The press went wild with questions, but I ended the conference with a final blow. For 12 years, I built this empire brick by brick, and for 12 seconds, they tried to tear down my name. But truth always wins. The room erupted in applause. Cameras followed me as I walked out like a man who had already won. That evening, chaos erupted at their mansion. Red and blue lights flashed across the gates as police cars lined the driveway. Neighbors peeked out, whispering, recording everything on their phones. Inside, my wife's mother, still in her fancy gown from last night's dinner, was shouting hysterically as officers read out charges of fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. She screamed, "This is a mistake. I built this family's name." But her voice cracked with fear. My wife clung to her mother, begging the officers to stop, while her sister tried to call their lawyer in a panic. Then my son walked down the grand staircase with a face that stunned them all. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at his aunt. He only looked at me, standing in the doorway with folded arms. "Dad," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I want to come home with you." The room froze. My wife gasped, "What are you saying?" "She's your grandmother. I'm your mother." But my son didn't flinch. "The man you humiliated is the one who raised me, who taught me values. And tonight I saw who you really are." Gasps filled the room as he grabbed his bag, already packed. He had been preparing for this moment. The police led his grandmother out in handcuffs while reporters outside shouted questions. My wife tried to chase after my son, tears streaming down her face, but he stepped back and said firmly, "You told him to apologize for being disrespected." That was the last straw. The cameras caught everything. By morning, headlines spread like wildfire. Son walks out on wealthy family. Chooses fake dad who exposed $120 million scandal. The empire they once flaunted was crumbling. Their name was finished. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an outcast. I felt like justice had finally been served. Weeks later, life had completely changed. The once untouchable family was splashed across every news outlet, their luxury mansion under investigation, their company stock crashing to the ground. The same relatives who laughed at me during that dinner were now hiding from cameras, ashamed and broken. Meanwhile, my son and I sat in our small but peaceful home, eating dinner together like we always used to. He looked up at me and said, "Dad, I used to think their money made us less. But I finally see now, you're richer than all of them put together." His words cut deep, but they healed years of pain in an instant. Then came the shocker. The board of directors from his grandmother's company reached out to me. They had discovered it was my honest work and ideas from years ago that built their empire in the first place. And now, with the family name destroyed, they needed me back not as an employee, but as an interim CEO to clean up the mess. When I walked into that office, reporters swarmed me. The same family that once mocked me as low-educated fake dad was now whispered about as criminals. My wife tried to approach me, tears in her eyes, begging for forgiveness. But I looked at her calmly and said, "You chose humiliation over respect, and now you've lost both." The cameras clicked, flashing like thunder. My son stood proudly beside me as I entered the boardroom, no longer the outcast, but the man in charge. The story that began with a slap ended with a roar of justice. And the world now knew one truth: respect is worth more than any fortune.